Good morning, MBU. Doing all right today? Well, that's good. Welcome to chapel. And if you aren't with us on Tuesday or Wednesday, our chapel speaker for this week is Dr. Frank Turek. And a short bio of Dr. Turek here is that he is an award-winning author, and as the president of Cross-Examine, Frank impacts young and old alike in colleges, high schools, and churches with hard yet entertaining evidence for Christianity. And he has appeared on many TV and radio programs, including The O'Reilly Factor, Hannity and Combs' Faith Under Fire, Politically Incorrect, The Bible Answer Man, and Focus on the Family. And so I love his heart here for college students, and I love how he connects to the audience here. And so it's been an honor to have him here this week in chapel, as well as a night talks as well. And if you would, at the end of chapel, if you're interested, he does have a book table here in the back. There in the Great Hall, and so take advantage of that. And if you would, please welcome once again Dr. Turek. Thanks, Frank.
Good morning, Spartans. We're going to jump right in and pick up where we left off yesterday. You recall that we did, these are the 4 questions you need to answer yes to show that Christianity is true. The very first day we talked about does truth exist? And we said if anyone says there is no truth, you would respond by asking what question? Is that true? If someone says all truth is relative, you're going to ask what? Is that a relative truth? If somebody says there are no absolutes, you're going to say, are you absolutely sure? You get the idea. The second point is, does God exist? And the second question is, does God exist? And we pointed out there are 3 major arguments for the existence of God. The cosmological argument, the teleological argument, we covered those yesterday. Cosmological argument shows that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. The teleological argument shows it came into existence with extreme precision and remains fine-tuned right now. The moral argument, however, is what we're going to talk about right now. The first 2 arguments are scientific in nature. This argument is more philosophical in nature. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to go on a trip from London all the way to Berlin. We basically did a World War II Reformation trip. Myself, a friend of mine, a couple of my sons, and some others. And on our way, we stopped at the Buchenwald concentration camp in Weimar, Germany. In April of 1945, the Allies liberated the camp. They went through the front gate, which is still there. They looked to the right. They saw the crematorium about 100 yards off in the distance, which is still there. When they got down to the crematorium, they looked into the courtyard attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Brace yourself. Now, if there is no God, this is just a matter of opinion. This is just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. Because if there's no standard beyond humanity, no unchanging, authoritative, moral, law-giving standard beyond humanity, then nothing is absolutely right or absolutely wrong, including this. In fact, if there is no God, then what the Nazis did was not really wrong. I was at Michigan State not long ago, and during the Q&A, there were a couple of atheists sitting over here, and we got talking about morality, and I said to one of the atheists, I said, well, you're an atheist. What's your standard of morality? And he said, whatever the majority decides is morally right. And I said, are you telling me that if you lived in a Nazi society and the majority or the plurality decided that it was right to murder Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies and other undesirables, that that would be morally right? And he blushed, he paused, and he went, yes. And his atheist buddy sitting right next to him looked at him and yelled, no! The kid in his heart, the first kid knew the answer was no. But in order to be consistent with his atheism, he had to say yes. Well, of course, on atheism, the
The majority doesn't get to decide. There is no ultimate morality. Whoever has the most power gets to decide, but that's still a subjective standard. There is no objective right or wrong if atheism's true. We're just molecules in motion anyway. In fact, if there is no God, love is no better than rape. Not in an objective sense anyway. It's just your opinion. Freedom's no better than slavery. Tolerance is no better than intolerance. If there's one absolute for a social or theological liberal, it's tolerance. But there's nothing wrong with intolerance if there is no God. Christians aren't called to be tolerant anyway. We're called to be loving. See, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And in order to be loving, sometimes you've got to tell people they ought not be doing what they're doing because they're hurting themselves and others. But there's no such thing as good or bad, tolerant or intolerant. If we're just molecules in motion, it's all a matter of opinion. Of course, religious crusades are not wrong if there's no God. I had the opportunity to debate Christopher Hitchens a couple of times, a brilliant guy, very witty, and he had a British accent which made him sound even more witty and more intelligent. And he would, during the debate, say, well, you religious people have done evil things in the Crusades, to which I responded, you know what, you're right. But if there's no God, there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with anything. In fact, if there is no God, you can't complain about the problem of evil. Why? Because there's no evil if there's no God, because there's no good if there's no God. In fact, C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist for a good portion of his life, thought that there was so much injustice in the world that there can't be a God. And then one day he had an epiphany. And he ultimately wrote this epiphany in his book, Mere Christianity. How many people in here have read Mere Christianity? Okay, if you don't have your hand up right now, consider yourself undereducated. Okay, you need to read Mere Christianity. Here's what he says in Mere Christianity. He says, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, if there's injustice or injustice, there must be justice. If something is not right, there must be something that is right. And the only way you can have objective morality is to have an unchanging, authoritative moral standard. That's exactly what we mean by God. So in order to be an atheist, you have to reject objective morality. Now, we all intuitively understand there are objective moral rights and moral wrongs. It's objectively morally wrong to murder people in the Holocaust. It's objectively morally wrong to torture babies for fun. If that's the case, God exists. Now, there's a lot more in the book on this. I'm skimming over a bunch. But the bottom line here is the shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. You can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless God existed. Because God is the standard of good, and evil is a lack in good. Now, what do we learn from the three arguments we've been through over the past couple of days, the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments? From these three arguments, we can conclude certain attributes about the cause of the universe. From the cosmological argument, we can see that this being is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material, time, and space, so he must transcend material, time, and space. We can also see that this being is extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. Do you realize everything we create out of pre-existing material? God creates out of nothing. Try that. Remember, what is nothing? Aristotle said nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. God creates out of nothing, no space, no matter, no time. We create out of pre-existing material. From the design argument, we know that this being is extremely intelligent. We also know that he has purpose, that we're here for a reason. From the moral argument, we can see that this being is absolutely morally perfect, and we can also see that he's personal. How do we know he's personal from the moral argument? Because you only have a moral obligation to persons. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. When you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only have moral obligation to persons. We also know that this being is personal from the cosmological argument. How so? Because in order to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice. And only persons make choices. Impersonal forces don't make choices. Gravity doesn't say, look, if Turek drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground. Right? Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. Given a certain conditions, it just does the same thing over and over again. It doesn't make choices. Only persons make choices. So the cause of the universe can't be an it. The cause of the universe has to be a person. Now, if you take a look at this, we have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, purposeful, morally perfect personal creator. This is the God of biblical Christianity, identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't even opened the Bible yet we have the attributes of the God of the Bible. Now, does this mean that Christianity is true? No, not yet. This is a necessary condition for Christianity, but not a sufficient condition. In other words, we have what appears to be the God of the Bible, a theistic God, but we don't know anything about Jesus yet. We don't know if Jesus is God. We don't know anything about the Trinity yet. We don't even know if the New Testament is telling us the truth. All we have is a being consistent with the God of the Bible, a theistic God. Well, you know, there are other theisms out there, right? You've got Judaism, of course, you've got Christianity, you've got Islam. Maybe Judaism or Islam is the right worldview, or maybe some other theism. All we have now is theism. So if we want to figure out, or let's say God exists and he wants to tell us which one of these world religions is true, what could he do? He could do something only he could do, and that would be a miracle. See, miracles can tell us that somebody speaks for God, and that's point 3. Now, a lot of people have trouble believing in miracles, particularly today. They haven't seen a miracle, so they figure they don't occur. In fact, miracles in the Bible, some of them seem outlandish, like Noah. How can you believe that? That seems like an outlandish story. I actually believe the Noah miracle occurred. In fact, back in 2006, I went with my friend who's the real Indiana Jones. His name is Bob Cornuke. And we went into Iran to find what could have been the remains of Noah's Ark. I don't have the time to tell you all the backstory here, but we flew into Tehran and we went about 55 miles northwest of Tehran into the Elburz Mountains to a place we had some intelligence. And about 13,000 feet, we saw this object sticking out of the side of a mountain, which could have been remains of an old boat. We got up to it and it was rock. Now it looked like the beams, the way it was oriented, it could have been the side of a boat at one point, so we pulled samples off it. We got the samples back to the United States, and 5 out of the 9 samples tested as petrified wood. But we can't prove it's Noah's Ark because it didn't say USS Noah on the side. Right? There's just no way of doing that. Also, resurrections. Few people believe in resurrections because they've never seen a resurrection. Everyone they know who's dead is still dead. And for some reason, the biggest problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a tail of a whale or a whale of a tail? What is the deal with Jonah? That seems so outlandish. People just can't believe in these miracles. Now, question, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? This is the interactive portion of the program. Yeah, the resurrection. People normally say the resurrection, but that's actually an easy miracle compared to the greatest miracle. What is the greatest miracle in the Bible? The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Well, we now have scientific evidence that the first verse is indeed true. It's called the cosmological argument. That the first verse of the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, is actually true. We have scientific and philosophical evidence for that. So if that verse is true, at least the other verses are possible. Look, if God can create the entire universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants? It's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course, if he can create the whole universe out of nothing, can he do the Noah miracle? Can he raise Jesus from the dead? Can he keep Jonah alive in a fish or kill him and resurrect him later and spit him out on land anywhere he wants? Of course he can. That's easy for God to create the universe out of nothing. Now, some of you are thinking, wait, you just said something, I don't know if it's right. You said God can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible. I thought God can do anything. No, there's even some things God can't do, like logically impossible things. What do you mean? Well, like God can't create a square circle, right? There's no such thing. He can't create a one-ended stick. No such thing. He can't create a married bachelor. No such thing. He can't create an honest politician. Okay? There's some things that are just too hard for God. All right? In fact, you can do some things that God can't do. Like what? You can lie. You can change. What's God going to change from? He's already a perfect being. If he changes, he moves from perfection to imperfection. In fact, if he could do those things, he wouldn't be God. He wouldn't be the unchangeable standard. He's the standard by which everything else is measured. So he can't do some things you can do, but if he could do them, he wouldn't be God. He'd be weaker. All right? So miracles are possible. Notice, by the way, if the New Testament documents are reliable, Jesus relates two of the most controversial miracles in his life to Noah and Jonah, or two of the most controversial miracles, Noah and Jonah, to his own life. Do you think Jesus thought that Noah and Jonah were historical or hysterical? He thought they were historical. Look, if God exists, miracles are possible. The only question now is, have any other miracles occurred since the first one? Now, I obviously left out a lot out of point 3. All the details are in the book. But the bottom line is, if God exists, miracles are possible. And the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred. We have good evidence for it. So maybe the other miracles have actually occurred. And for this, we're going to look into the New Testament and see if the New Testament's telling us the truth. And in order to do this, I'm going to give you 6 lines of evidence to show that the New Testament writers are telling the truth. 6 testimonies, if you will. They all begin with the letter E. Help you remember them. The first is we have early testimony. And that points out that most, if not all, the New Testament documents are written prior to 70 A.D. And the data, or the testimony, inside those documents goes back much earlier. We have eyewitness testimony. There's over 140 details just in the book of Acts and the Gospel of John alone that have been verified to be eyewitness details. All these details are listed in chapter 10 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. You can see them. Also, we have embarrassing testimony. I'll explain what that is in a minute. We have excruciating testimony. We'll cover that as well. We have expected testimony. That deals with Old Testament prophecy. And if I only had one Old Testament prophecy to make my case that there should be a Messiah coming, it's Isaiah 53. If you've never read Isaiah chapter 53, go read Isaiah chapter 53. In fact, begin in chapter 52, verse 13, and read to the end of 53 and ask yourself, who is this about? When you read this, you will say, this is an uncanny description of the substitutionary atonement that Jesus accomplished for us, yet it's written 700 years in advance. And how do we know it's written in advance? Because it's the greatest of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The entire Isaiah scroll, 24 feet long. That particular scroll found in the Dead Sea is at least as old as 100 BC, if not older. So we know that this prophecy predates Christ by 150 or so years, at least. We also have extra biblical testimony. 10 ancient non-Christian sources who lived within 150 years of Jesus give us brief little facts about Jesus and the apostles in early Christianity, and when we put those facts together, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. Now, we don't have time to cover all these. We're only going to cover embarrassing and excruciating testimony. So let's start with embarrassing testimony. Now, what is embarrassing testimony? The principle of embarrassment goes like this. If there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why? Why would it be true? Yeah, why would you make up embarrassing details about yourself? In fact, let me ask you guys this question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? Can I see your hands, please? Those of you that don't have your hands up right now are lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working because we know you're lying. All right? How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? Now, you don't lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you don't lie to make yourself look bad. Now, it turns out the New Testament, and by the way, this is true of the Old Testament as well, but the New Testament writers point out all sorts of embarrassing details about themselves and even about Jesus that they wouldn't have made up. That's why we call this the duh factor. There's no way they would have made this up. For example, the New Testament writers depict themselves as dim-witted. They failed to understand what Jesus is saying several times. They didn't even know what his mission was until after he had already been crucified. That's pretty embarrassing, right? They're traveling with this guy for 3 years and they just don't quite get it. Also, they are uncaring. They fall asleep on Jesus not once, but twice. Stay up with me and pray. This is my greatest hour of need. We'll do it, Lord. Don't worry. What do they wind up doing? Not once, but twice. And then they make no effort to give Jesus a proper burial. Who buries Jesus? Joseph of Arimathea. And who is Joseph? And Nicodemus too. But Joseph was a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council that sentenced Jesus to die. Now, why would they make Joseph look like a good guy while they ran away and hid for fear of the Jews? And why would they put Jesus in a Jewish tomb? What could the Jews have done if the Christians began claiming that Jesus had risen from the dead when Jesus' own body was in the Jews' own tomb? Well, the Jews could have gone to their own tomb, taken out the body, and said, stop all this nonsense, talk about the resurrection. He's dead. Here's his body. But they didn't do that at all. What did they say? They said the disciples came and stole the body while the guards were asleep. Now, that's a bad explanation for at least two reasons. Reason number one, if you're a Roman guard on duty and you fall asleep on watch, what happens to you? You're toast. Reason number two, if you're a Roman guard on duty and you fall asleep on watch, how do you know what happened? Are you guys awake? What happened? Well, we were asleep, see, and then the disciples came and stole the body while we were still sleeping. Well, then how do you know what? Stop asking questions and just give us the bribe. You say, well, how do you even know that story's true? Well, it's in the Gospel of Matthew. Well, how do you know Matthew's telling the truth? Because it's not just Matthew who says this. For the first 150 or so years of early Christianity, the Christians kept saying, Jesus has risen from the dead. And the Jews kept saying the disciples came and stole the body while the guards were asleep. Well, what does that imply? It implies the tomb was empty. You don't need to come up with a story to explain the empty tomb if he's still in there. The Jews' own story presupposes the tomb is empty. Also, they are rebuked. Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. You think they made this up? You think Mark, who recorded this, said to Peter one day, hey, I'm going to make this a really good story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. What's he calling me Satan for? I'm the leader here. And then notice, Paul rebukes Peter for being wrong about a theological issue. He says, look, I told Peter to his face that he was wrong for trying to get these New Testament believers to obey the Old Testament law. Now, if they're making all this up, why are two apostles arguing over theology in the Bible? Because they're not making it up. They're just trying to get it right, even though it was embarrassing. Also, Peter denies Christ 3 times after saying, I'll never deny you, Lord. Remember, this is their leader. Would any CEO let this kind of stuff get out of his company? No way. And then the disciples run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. Oh, they all run away. And who are the brave ones? Ladies, who are the brave ones? The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote this down? Men. Now, what man is going to say that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here make that up? No way. Look, if I was making it up, I'd write something down like this. Let's see. We marched right down there and overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. And then we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. We would never say we were Mr. Sissy Pants while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say that the women were the first witnesses in that culture? I mean, if you're making it up, why would you never say it? Because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They were. They're just telling the truth. Actually, one lady came up to me once and she said, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? She said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, you know, that is an excellent point. I hadn't thought about that yet. Because ladies, you know that men, they don't say much. Imagine Peter coming home that first day from work. He sees his wife. His wife says, you know, that Resurrection Sunday, it happens. Hey, honey, anything happen at work today? Nah, that's right. Nah. Same old, same old. Wait, I heard that Jesus had risen from the dead just like he had predicted. Is it true? Oh, yeah, it is. What do you got to eat around here? Right? You see, men don't say much. I mean, ladies, you'll realize this a little bit later on, that men won't say much. There could be a nuclear explosion at work. They won't tell you, all right? They don't say much. Also, notice they are doubters. Despite being taught several times that Jesus would rise from the dead, the disciples are doubtful when they hear of his resurrection. Not only are they doubtful when they hear of his resurrection, some are even doubtful after they see him risen. You see this verse right here, Matthew 28:17. What happens in Matthew 28:19? Does anyone know? That's the Great Commission. Yeah, Jesus is giving them the Great Commission. This is a climactic point. He's standing on the Mount of Olives and he says to them, go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he didn't say make believers. Make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And then he ascends to heaven. And as he's saying this, some are standing there looking at him going, you see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. I'm telling you, it's Jesus. It can't be Jesus. He was killed. I saw him killed. The spear went in his side, blood and water. I'm telling you, it's Jesus. It can't be Jesus. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. Also, there's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus. Notice his own family considers him out of his mind. They want to seize him and take him away. They think he's nuts. You've probably heard people say, well, you know, the New Testament writers embellish Jesus to make him out to be God. Oh, really? Then why are they putting this kind of thing in there? Also, he's not believed in by his own brothers, or actually his own followers leave him. In John chapter 6, he gets to a point where he says, look, you want to follow me? You must eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they say, eat your flesh and drink blood. This is a hard teaching. We can't follow this guy anymore. Hey, if I was there, I'd say the same thing. Eat your flesh and drink your blood. What are you, a cannibal? I'm not following you either. And who would have made that doctrine up? Eat flesh, drink blood. That's not a made-up doctrine. They're just telling the truth. He's not believed in by his own brothers. In John chapter 7, his own brothers don't believe in him, which would include James, the guy who eventually wrote that little book in the New Testament called James. Amazing how that works. Well, when Jesus was on the earth prior to the resurrection, he didn't think his own brother was God. We later learn, however, about 30 years after the resurrection, James dies as a martyr in the city of Jerusalem. He's the pastor of the church there. And the Sanhedrin throw him off the Temple Mount. When he hits the ground, they find him still alive, so they bludgeon him to death. Who tells us this? No New Testament document does. The Jewish writer Josephus, who was in Jerusalem at the time, he lived from 37 AD to 100 AD, he tells us this, that James was killed as a martyr. Now, why would he do this? Well, probably the earliest testimony for the resurrection is in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8. It's an ancient creed that goes all the way back to the event itself. And in that creed, it says Jesus appeared to James. But when Jesus was on the earth prior to his resurrection, James did not think his own brother was God. The resurrection convinced him. Now, how many people in here have a brother? How many people in here have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, right? It would take a resurrection for you to believe that. Also, he's thought to be a deceiver. He turns off Jewish believers to the point that they want to stone him. In John chapter 8, he's talking to Jews who believe in him. He gets to the point in the conversation, he says, look, if you believed in me, if you believed in Abraham, you ought to believe in me because I knew Abraham. And they said, wait a minute, you're not even 50 years old. How could you know Abraham? And he said, before Abraham was born, I am. And they immediately picked up stones to stone him. Why? Who is he claiming to be? What does I am mean? Where did he get the I am thing from? That's a quotation from Exodus 3:14, the burning bush. Do you remember when God appeared to Charlton Heston? Moses says to God, who should I tell the Israelites you are? And God says, tell them I am sends you. What does I am mean? I am means the self-existent eternal one. The one who had no beginning, will have no end, the ground of all being. the being that just is, the unmoved mover, the first cause. Jesus is claiming to be that being. He's claiming to be Yahweh, the Old Testament. That's why the Jews picked up stones to stone him. They knew exactly what he was claiming to be. It amazes me today. There are people out there who say Jesus never claimed to be God. Like Jehovah's Witnesses. When they come to my door, I go, come on in. You want something to drink? They get out their Watchtower material. I go, whoa, before we get to the Watchtower, can I just ask you a couple of questions? Sure, go ahead. First question, this is the question I ask all unbelievers. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If they hesitate at all, I know its issue isn't here, it's here. Second question is, if Jesus never claimed to be God, then why did they kill him? For saying, love your neighbor? Does that get you killed? Imagine Jesus out giving a sermon, love your neighbor. A couple of guys hear him. Did you hear what Jesus just said? Yeah, he said, love your neighbor. We can't tolerate that. You must die. No, you don't get killed for skipping around saying, love your neighbor. You get killed for claiming to be God. Why? Because by claiming to be God, that's blasphemy to the Jews and it's sedition to the Romans. In fact, early on in Christianity, the Romans considered the Christians atheists. They knew they weren't Jews, but they wouldn't bow down to Caesar or the Roman gods, so they said, these people must be atheists. That's why they killed Jesus, because it was blasphemy to the Jews and sedition or treason to the Romans. You didn't get killed for skipping around saying, love your neighbor, or bless those who persecute you. He got killed for claiming to be God. He's also called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. Hey, that's real flattering. You think they made that up? He also has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And by the way, do you notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline? Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Do you think Matthew and Luke said, you know what? I think we need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. No. They're just telling the truth, as embarrassing as that is. In fact, if you look at one of the genealogies, when they get to Bathsheba, he doesn't even use her name. What does he say? He says, Uriah's wife. I mean, it's embarrassing. He reports it, but he doesn't use her name. So what you have in the Messiah's bloodline are two prostitutes, an adulterer, and of course, David, an adulterer and a murderer. This isn't the Messiah's bloodline. You don't see this kind of honesty in other historical accounts. Like the Egyptians, you won't see this kind of negative reporting in the history of the pharaohs. Why? Because the pharaoh's historian would have his head chopped off if he said anything like that about the pharaoh. This is too embarrassing to even make up. And he's crucified despite the fact that anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. If you're making up a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree, because that would be under God's curse. Well, Jesus was under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin that we all put him under. But if you were making this up, you wouldn't say this. Now, there's more embarrassing details in the book, but I got to move on to one more of the E's, and that's excruciating testimony. And this word excruciating means out of the crucifixion. That's where we get it. And this is the argument that says that these disciples, these eyewitnesses, died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying he hadn't risen from the dead. This, of course, is a Caravaggio, a painting of Peter being crucified upside down. He could have saved himself by saying, no, it never happened. But he went to his death anyway. Now, before we get into that, let's take a look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Now, keep in mind, the early Christians were all Jews. In fact, all the writers were Jews with the possible exception of Luke. So they thought they had a 2,000-year-old relationship with the God of the universe. They thought they were God's chosen people. And before Jesus showed up, they believed in animal sacrifice. They had been sacrificing lambs and other animals to Yahweh for hundreds of years. And then suddenly Jesus shows up and they say, Christ's sacrifice is enough. You see all these lambs we've been slaying? These lambs are just symbols pointing to the true Lamb, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Since he has come, these symbols aren't necessary anymore. Jesus has fulfilled it. He is the Lamb of God. They gave it all up virtually overnight. Before they believed in a binding law of Moses, afterwards they believed that Christ's life has fulfilled it. Christ lived the law of Moses, which makes it not binding on us anymore because we put our trust in him and we have fulfilled it that way. Before they believed in strict monotheism, afterward they believed in a trinity. 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, the Trinity is hinted at in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before they believed in the Sabbath, in fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they believed in Sunday worship. They got together on the first day of the week, which was a work day, because that's the day he rose. And in Colossians chapter 2, I think it is, Paul says, don't let anyone ever tell you you have to obey certain festivals or Sabbath days. That's already been fulfilled. Christ has done it all. Before they believed in a conquering Messiah, afterwards they believed in a sacrificial Messiah. Before they believed in circumcision, afterwards they believed in baptism and communion. Now, what would have caused these pious Jews who thought they were God's chosen people for 2,000 or so years to abandon everything on the left for everything on the right virtually overnight? Well, the only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event so dramatic in your life that it could impact you to such an extent that you can change your perspective dramatically, instantly. Some impact events are so impactful that you'll remember the impact event for years. If you're old enough, you'll remember an impact event that happened 50 years ago. You might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, but you'll remember an impact event that happened 50 years ago. In fact, only a few of you in this room will be able to answer this question. Maybe some on the staff will. If you can remember where you were November 22nd, 1963, raise your hand. Can anyone in the staff remember? If you would keep your hands up for just a minute, the rest of you, I want you to look around at these people with their hands up. You see these people? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old and 2 days. Yeah, I'm 51 years old. I know I don't look a day over 50. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife said, I think you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Anyway. November 22nd, 1963, I'm standing in the living room. I'm a toddler. I'm 2 years old and 2 days. My mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of the TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see her in my mind right now when she was 26 years old. She's 75 today. But I can see her when she was 26 right now as if she was sitting right there. Impact event. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? Some of you are old enough to remember that, right? I was on the phone. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was on the phone to a pastor in Charlotte, and he wanted me to come speak at his church, and I had the TV on behind me. I had seen the first tower had been hit. I didn't know by what. So I said, hey, you got the TV on? He goes, yeah. I go, something must be going on in New York City. I don't know, maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower or something. And we're talking, and suddenly he screams into the phone. And I turn around, and I look at the TV. The second tower's on fire. He goes, another plane just went into the second tower. I said, what kind of plane? A Cessna? He goes, no, it was a big plane. It was a United plane. It was a jumbo jet. I said, you saw that? He goes, yeah, it just went in and exploded. I said, look, I'll call you back. I hung up the phone. For some reason that morning I had CNN on, the communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said, one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You doofus. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. Who do you think's flying these planes? Stevie Wonder? Come on, this is terrorism. I called the pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 was what? 12 years ago? 11 years ago? 12 years ago. And those who are old enough can remember where you were and what you were doing. But if I ask you where you were September 11th of this year, which was 3 weeks ago, There's not a person here that could tell me why. No impact event that day. Do you think a resurrection would have been an impact event? Do you think if Jesus really rose from the dead, they would have remembered everything they were saying and everything they were doing and everything he was saying and everything he was doing till the day they died? Of course, that's the only way I would have figured out why they would have abandoned everything on the left for everything on the right virtually overnight. In fact, here's a question to ask. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did these Jews have to gain by making up a new religion? Well, they got excommunicated from the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. Hey, we're going to start a new religion? We are? Yeah, what's it going to get us? Well, first it'll get us excommunicated, and then we'll get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. Why haven't we thought of this before? What a great idea. No, I don't think so. In fact, what motive did the New Testament writers have to make up a new religion or to make up the resurrection? They had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. You know, I get a lot of questions, and maybe you do too if you're a Christian. You get a question like, well, are there any non-Christian sources to talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, there are. I mentioned them briefly. They're all in chapter 9 of the book. But you know what that question presupposes? It presupposes that these people you can't trust because they were biased. You see, these are religious people, and they embellished it. That is the stupidest thing if you think about it for 30 seconds. Because if anybody had a bias not to write this down, it's the people who did write it down. Why? Because by writing it down, they got excommunicated, beaten, tortured, and killed. If anything, they wanted to say the resurrection did not happen, but they went and said it happened anyway, which is telling us what? It really did. They had everything to lose by saying it happened. Why would they die for a known lie? Now you're saying, wait, Frank, are you telling me martyrdom proves Christianity? Because if so, you just got done talking about Islam. You see, Islam has martyrs. And we don't believe that Islam is true, particularly when it comes to Jesus. In Surah 4, verse 157, it says Jesus never even died, much less rose from the dead. Of course, the New Testament documents say he did die and rise from the dead. Yet they both have martyrs. Isn't it a wash here? No, it's not a wash at all. In fact, there's a big difference between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of yesterday. There's a number of differences, but let me just give you one for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs don't have evidence that Islam is true. They just have faith. But the New Testament martyrs verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They talked with Jesus. They knew he had risen from the dead with their own senses. And they went ahead and died for it. You see, many people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament martyrs were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went ahead with it anyway. Now, there's a bunch of other evidence in the book I don't have time to get into, but we need to wrap this up. We have early eyewitness, embarrassing, excruciating, expect on extra biblical testimony. In fact, in the book, the chapter is called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. These are just 6 of them, and we've only covered 2 of them. So the conclusion, the New Testament's historically reliable. It's fact, not fiction. If it says Jesus said it, then Jesus really said it. If it says Jesus did it, then Jesus really did it. So what's the overall argument? And it's more fleshed out in the book, but does truth exist? The answer is yes. It's self-defeating to say it doesn't. Does God exist? The answer is yes. We have 3 arguments and actually many more that say that this being exists. Are miracles possible? Of course, the greatest miracle has already occurred. The only question is, have other miracles occurred? And that's why we just went through the New Testament documents. And if the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in, because Jesus in the New Testament, who claims and proves to be God, whatever he teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament is the Word of God. So you get the whole Bible here. Now, if you want to go more into this, the book is available on the book table as well as the DVDs, so you can go further. And by the way, it makes a great Christmas gift. Only 94 more days till Christmas, right? Something like that, I don't know. Don't forget about the app. Go to the App Store. And also go to our website, crossexamine.org, if you want to get the app. It's got a quick answer section on there. It's got all our podcasts. Also, if you sign up for our email on the book table with this little, we're not quite done yet. Hold on. I'm not quite dead yet. If you sign up for our email, you tear this thing off, give it to Melissa back there at the table. You get to keep the bookmark. And we'll send you 1 email a month with a good article that will help you apologetically. We don't give your email address to anybody else. We're also on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook like everybody is. In fact, we're so into social media, we've combined these three to a new social media platform, and we call it UTwitface. Okay? Don't forget we're on radio, and we're also on TV. All right, last thing. It's true. The question now is, so what if it's true? What does it mean to me? Why did Jesus come? Well, actually, Jesus tells us why he came. He said, for even the Son of Man did not come to serve, or did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, many of us think, ransom? I don't need anybody paying God a ransom to get me off the hook. I'm a pretty good person. I can get there on my own. Nobody needs to pay God off. I can make it to God on my own. You know why we think that? Because we have a relative moral standard in our mind. From the moral giant Mother Teresa down to the moral midget Hitler. And next to Hitler, we put criminals. We know they're not quite as bad as Hitler, but they're bad. Then next to criminals, we put all the immoral people that you and I all know. You know, our immoral friends and relatives who aren't quite as good as we are, because our picture's right here next to Mother Teresa. And then if we believe in heaven and hell at all, we arbitrarily draw a line in the sand and we say, these are the bad people, they're going to hell, and we're the good people, we're going to heaven. This is not the way the moral universe really works. The line does not run up and down. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to one another. The moral line actually runs across the top. That's God's perfect moral standard, and all of us have fallen short of that line, from Mother Teresa all the way down to Hitler. And what Christ has come and done is he's lived a perfect life in our place. And by putting your trust in him, you're not only forgiven for your sins, but you're given Christ's righteousness. When you think about that, that's amazing. You're forgiven, and then you're given his righteousness. So when God sees you morally, judicially, he doesn't punish you because he's already punished Christ in your stead, and Christ's life was perfect. Now, this was not done easily. You and I were bought at a price. The purpose of his life was to be punished in your place. His life was a gift to you. Have you received his gift? If not, why not? It's free. And if you have, does anyone know it? Or if they were to drag you into a courtroom like they do in Pakistan and try and convict you of being a Christian, would you be convicted or would you be acquitted? If you'd be acquitted, you may want to reconsider how you've been living. The least we can do out of gratitude for what he's done for us is to let other people know that we stand with him, as imperfect as we are. And if we were perfect, we wouldn't need to stand for him. Father, I pray you'd help us to do that. I pray that you'd rise up the people here at Missouri Baptist University to be great beacons for you wherever they go. In Christ's name, amen. See you next time, friends.